Hello there. Take a deep breath and let it go. You've found a quiet place now, far from the noise, the glowing screens, and the rush of modern life. Here, in this stillness, we take gentle journeys through the past. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just the slow unfolding of human history, strange, beautiful, and sometimes bleak. This is boring history for sleep. And if the soft rhythm of forgotten lives helps you drift off, you might consider subscribing. There's always another story waiting, buried in the quiet dust of time. Tonight, our journey begins in the cold north, not among the heroes of Viking lore, not with raiders or kings, but with someone left out of the sagas. A person whose story was never meant to be told. A person who cooked, cleaned, carried, and endured. Someone who did not choose their life, but lived it anyway. We begin with the Viking Thrall, a slave, a servant, a shadow in the longhouse. And from there we will follow 4 slow, winding paths. The daily life of a Viking thrall, harsh and hidden. The long and stormy journey of Harald Hardrada, a king without a throne. A mysterious runestone filled with forgotten meanings. And finally, a quiet night in the longhouse of a jarl with firelight, mead and myth. You don't need to stay awake for it all. Let the rhythm of these lives steady, cold, and real carry you into sleep. The morning doesn't arrive with sunshine, it arrives with cold, a steady, creeping chill that seeps in through the gaps in the wooden planks and wraps itself around your ankles before your eyes even open. You don't need the sun to tell you it's time to rise. The ache in your limbs does that for you, a dull, familiar weight that has settled deep into the muscles from days and weeks and seasons of unrelenting repetition. You are not in a bed. There is no pillow, no blanket, no mattress to speak of. Only straw, laid in a shallow pile across the packed dirt floor of the longhouse. The straw is not fresh. It hasn't been changed in weeks. It's flattened, broken, and carries the faint smell of mold, sweat, and dust. In winter, it is cold and damp. In summer, it is hot and scratchy. But it is yours, or at least it is what you are allowed. You share this small patch of space with mice and insects and the occasional boot that steps too close in the dark. You are careful not to move too quickly. The others are still sleeping, the master's wife, curled in furs, her breathing slow and steady, the youngest child, whimpering quietly in his dreams, and in the far corner, the old farmhand who lost 2 fingers to frost last winter and rarely speaks now. Your place is near the door, the draftiest part of the longhouse. You were placed here for a reason. You are the first to rise and the last to rest. You are closest to the firewood pile, closest to the tasks, closest to the expectations that never sleep. Your breath fogs faintly as you sit up, shoulders stiff beneath a tunic that was once wool but has long since been patched with whatever scraps could be found, linen, leather, even a bit of sailcloth once, sewn in by someone long dead. You reach for your shoes. One has a cracked sole, the other is too tight across the top, but you force it on anyway. There is no time, and more importantly, no choice. You step outside before the sun has breached the horizon. The air hits you like a slap. It's not the kind of cold that makes you gasp, it's the kind that simply enters, without resistance, through the sleeves of your tunic, through the frayed hem, through the worn seams of your shoes. It is everywhere. The sky is a dull iron grey. A light frost coats the ground, crunching faintly beneath your feet. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls out once and is answered by silence. There is work to be done, always. The fire must be relit. You left it banked in ash last night, and with luck, some embers remain. If not, you will need to strike flint for a spark and coax the flame with dry grass and breath. You've done it hundreds of times. You will do it hundreds more. After the fire comes the water, buckets to the stream and back. The path is muddy from yesterday's rain. Your feet will slip, your legs will chill, and your hands will burn from carrying the full buckets, one on each side, the wooden handles digging grooves into your skin. The animals come next, chickens to be fed, a goat to be milked. Perhaps one of the pigs got loose in the night again. They often do. Then there's the master's breakfast porridge, likely. And if it's not salted right, or if it's cold, or if the bowl isn't placed just so on the table, you'll hear about it. Not with shouts. Your master doesn't often raise his voice. He doesn't have to. A glance, a pause, a single sentence spoken flat and quiet can chill you more than the dawn ever could. And if he is in a worse mood, if his temper boils over, as it sometimes does, there are no protections. You are not a servant, not an apprentice, not a poor neighbour working for bread. You are something else entirely. You are property. You are a thrall. You weren't always here, not in this longhouse, not on this patch of northern soil, not beneath this sky that never seems to warm. The path that led you to this place is lost now, worn away by years of repetition. Perhaps you were born into bondage, your mother a thrall before you. Her body worked until her back curved and her voice grew hoarse. Or maybe you came here screaming, taken in a raid while the world around you burned a coastal village caught in the wrong tide of war. You don't talk about it. No one asks. And even if they did, you're not sure you'd remember it clearly. The past doesn't belong to you anymore. It drifts like smoke, fading with each season, replaced by tasks, commands, and silence. You have a name. You know this, but it is not the name you were born with. That one is gone mispronounced, mocked, or simply ignored until it faded from use. Now, if they call you anything at all, it's by your function. Boy, girl, the Irish one, the tall one, the one with the scar, or simply Thrall. It is strange, in a quiet way, how a person can vanish without dying. There is no ownership of the self here. Your body is not your own, that much is clear in the way it is directed, touched, punished. But your thoughts, your memories, your private self, those, too, are slowly chipped away, not through force but through habit, through knowing when to stay silent, through understanding that a wrong look, a poorly timed sigh, might bring trouble not just to you, but to others, like you. You have learned to observe, to listen, to remember the unspoken rules of the household. When the master's temper runs short, which happens more often in the winter, when trade slows and tempers fray, when the mistress prefers silence over chatter, when the smallest child is likely to scream if startled, when the dog by the hearth has a sore paw and will snap if stepped near. None of this was taught. You learned it in the way that animals learn, through repetition, through pain, through patience. You know how to fade into the edge of a room, how to make yourself useful without being noticed, how to breathe shallowly when nearby voices begin to rise. These are skills. They will not be praised, but they will keep you safe. Sometimes, though, you remember something. A scent wood smoke that smells just slightly different from the fires here, or a song hummed by one of the older women in a moment of rare peace that tugs at something in the back of your mind. The words are unfamiliar, but the rhythm is not. You don't know where it comes from, but it feels like home, a home you no longer fully believe in. You let the thought pass. It's easier that way. Dwelling too long on the past makes the present harder to survive. Your days are filled from edge to edge, if not with labour, then with waiting, if not with pain, then with the fear of it. The line between rest and punishment is thin, and often decided by mood rather than action. Still, you do not resist. Not openly. What would be the point? You have seen what happens to those who lash out. A boy once struck a goat too hard in frustration, or perhaps shouted when told to kneel. The details don't matter. What matters is what followed. The way he limped for weeks, the way no one spoke to him during meals, the way his tasks doubled while his food stayed the same. You learned from that. Everyone did. There is a kind of dignity in survival, a quiet, breath-by-breath endurance that no one sings about in the sagas. The Skalds do not stand by the fire and tell tales of the boy who rose early every morning, ground grain with blistered palms, and never once spoke out of turn. But that story exists all the same, and you are living it. Day by day, task by task, step by weary step. And though your name may not be yours, and though your voice may go unheard, still, you remain, not by choice, but by quiet, unyielding will. The day unfolds without drama. There is no grand beginning, no crescendo of activity, no moment that announces its own importance. It begins, it continues, and it ends like the day before, and the day before that, a string of repetition that stretches so far behind you it begins to erase itself. You rise before the others. You always do. The sun is not yet visible, but the sky has softened to a lighter grey. You've already rekindled the fire, already hauled water from the stream. The bucket is heavy, wooden, and leaks slightly from the bottom seam, so you have learned to carry it with a slow, practiced rhythm that loses as little as possible. The animals are restless. Chickens cluck lowly in the dark. The goat bleats in protest as you check her hooves and fasten her rope. The pigs are loudest, always loudest noses pressed against the wooden bars of their pen, snorting at your approach, rooting for food, for change, for anything. You feed them in silence. The grain smells faintly sour. The pigs don't mind. Inside the longhouse, the household is beginning to stir. You hear footsteps above the loft boards creaking under careful steps. A cough, the scrape of bedding, then voices, low, at first. Then clearer. That is your cue to prepare the morning meal. Today it is barley porridge again. The grains were soaked overnight, left in a clay bowl near the hearth. You stir them now with a wooden spoon, adding water, watching the mixture thicken over heat that you nursed back to life only an hour ago. You move slowly, carefully, not out of laziness, but because haste leads to accidents, and accidents invite punishment. You've learned this the hard way. Once you spilled a bowl of milk meant for the master's son. It soaked into the floor, pooling around your bare feet before you could grab a cloth. The boy laughed. The master didn't. Your cheeks stung for days, but the silence afterward, the way no one looked at you until supper lasted even longer. So now, you move with quiet precision. You test the porridge with your finger, not too hot, not too thick. You ladle it into wooden bowls and set them in place, aligned just so. You do not eat yet. Your own meal comes later, and it will be whatever is left, crusts, skins, scorched bits at the bottom of the pot. You've grown used to that. Hunger is not unfamiliar. It comes and goes like weather, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always present in some form. After breakfast, the real labour begins. In the summer months, there are fields to tend, rye and barley and flax, rows of green waiting to be weeded, watered, harvested. In the winter, there is wood to split, ice to break, paths to clear. You've hauled stones to rebuild a wall so many times, your hands can trace its cracks in the dark. You have no trade, no single task you are known for. You are simply a body, assigned to what is needed. One day you mend fishing nets, squatting for hours until your legs go numb. The next, you grind grain until your arms burn. The next, you chase a runaway goat through a thicket of thorn and snow, returning with scratches that no one asks about. No one asks much of you, unless it is something to be done. And yet, within the blur of sameness, you come to know the textures of your world, the sound of boots on mud versus snow, the smell of old hay, dry and sweet, the rhythm of a broom over dirt. The way light shifts inside the longhouse as the sun climbs and falls golden in the morning, pale by noon, smoky and dim by evening. There is a kind of comfort in these details, even as they trap you. The life of a thrall does not offer variety, but it does offer structure. You always know what comes next. The sameness becomes a rhythm, a hum beneath everything, like the tide, or the seasons, or your own breath. And that rhythm, over time, becomes who you are. Not because you chose it, but because it is what you know. You are always there, yet never seen. Present in every task, every corner of the household, and yet outside of it all. You walk among the family, among the visitors, among the other workers, but you are not part of them. You exist just outside the lines they draw, just beyond the circle of warmth near the fire, just behind the doorframe. And you learn over time how to live in those edges. In the longhouse, space is precious. There are no rooms as we know them now, no walls to separate roles or rank. There is only closeness. People sleep beside one another, eat in the same space, breathe the same smoky air. But proximity does not equal equality. The master's family sleeps farthest from the door, where the wind cannot reach, and the fire's heat lingers longest. Guests, if they are highborn or of status, may sleep nearby, wrapped in their own cloaks or settled onto straw freshly laid in their honour. The workers, those paid or trusted, might have pallets or hanging skins. And then there are the thralls. You sleep near the entrance, always. It is not a matter of comfort or convenience, but of hierarchy. You are closest to the cold, closest to the tasks, closest to danger, should any come. You are the one who opens the door when there's a knock, the one who steps into the dark when the animals cry out, the one who wakes first and sleeps last. And that space defines more than just where you rest your head. It marks your place in everything. At meals, you eat last if at all. You may be called to serve, to carry bowls, to refill horns, to sweep crumbs. If there is extra, you may sit near the wall and eat in silence. If not, you eat later, outside, or with the animals. When strangers visit, you are expected to vanish. Not entirely, you are still needed, still useful, but your presence must be muted. You speak only when spoken to. You look down. You do not ask questions. You are not introduced. And yet, you see everything. You see the way the master's son eyes the merchant's daughter, the way the merchant's smile falters when prices are too low, the way the mistress fingers her necklace when worried, or the way the oldest child bites their lip when lying. You are a shadow, but a shadow that notices. And it is not just people. You learn the moods of the house itself, the way the roof groans under snow, the way the fire hisses before rain. You know when to open the flaps to let smoke out, and when to close them tight against wind. You know which beam creaks when stepped on, and how to walk so it doesn't. Still, none of this knowledge is acknowledged. It is not praised. It is not rewarded. It is simply expected. If you disappear too well, if your presence is forgotten entirely, you may be punished for neglect. If you are noticed too much, if your eyes linger, if your steps are too loud, you may be punished for insolence. So you learn to walk the narrow line between invisibility and usefulness. You develop a kind of second sight, a sensitivity to the smallest shifts in the world around you. You notice silence where there should be chatter. You hear tension in a footstep, or in the way someone sets down a bowl just a little too hard. You move in response, always adjusting, always anticipating, never resisting. Because to resist would be to break the rhythm, and breaking the rhythm means pain. You have seen what happens when others forget their place. A young thrall once spoke too sharply when scolded not with malice, just with tiredness. The punishment was quiet, but brutal. He was not struck in anger, but sent to work in the marshes alone, cold, knee-deep in mud for days. When he returned, he didn't speak for a week. You remember, everyone remembers. And so you do not speak unless asked. You do not raise your voice. You do not rest until someone tells you to, and even then, you keep one ear open. Living on the edge means never fully letting go, never fully relaxing, never fully belonging. But you survive. And in a world where your story is never written down, where your life will not be sung about or etched into stone, survival is the only story you get to write. And you write it one step at a time on cold earth with bare feet. The human body is built for effort, for lifting, pulling, walking, bending. It is a sturdy machine in its own way, but even the strongest frame grows tired. Even the most obedient limbs reach a point where they falter. And when you are a thrall, there is no room for faltering. Your body is your only tool, your only offering, your only defense. And it does not belong to you. When sickness comes, as it often does in the damp seasons, it is met not with concern but with calculation. If you cough, you work anyway. If you limp, you still haul. If you vomit at dawn, you are still expected to feed the pigs by dusk. There is no waiting to feel better, no time set aside for healing. The expectation is simple: continue or be replaced. If you collapse, someone else will finish your task not out of kindness, but because the work cannot stop. And if you cannot recover quickly enough, you become a burden, a liability, a problem to be solved. Some masters are harsher than others. Some offer nothing more than silence when you fall behind. Others issue correction, a withheld meal, a task doubled, a moment of cold indifference delivered in front of others, a kind of unspoken warning. And still others believe in reminders that leave marks. The law, such as it is, permits it. A master may discipline a thrall however he sees fit, provided it does not cause permanent damage. But what counts as permanent is left to interpretation. A bruise fades. A limp might go unnoticed. A hand that trembles still carries water. You have learned how to avoid punishment, not entirely, but mostly. You have learned which corners to cut, which gestures to make, which tones to avoid. You have learned to apologize quickly and never ask twice. You have learned that stillness, when noticed, is dangerous. And yet, sometimes it still finds you. You have been pushed to the floor once, maybe twice, not recently, but long enough ago to remember it without flinching. You have heard the hiss of an angry word behind your ear, sharp and breathless. You have known what it is to be ignored completely, which in its own way feels worse. But not all harm comes from hands. Much of it comes from time. Your knees ache when the weather turns. Your back tightens before storms. You have a tooth that throbs now and then, but there is no salve for it, and even if there were, it would not be for you. You chew on the opposite side. You speak less when it flares. Your knees ache when the weather turns. Your back tightens before storms. You have a tooth that throbs now and then, but there is no salve for it, and even if there were, it would not be for you. You chew on the opposite side. You speak less when it flares. Sleep does not always restore you. Sometimes it merely softens the edges of exhaustion. There are no physicians here. The old woman who helps with births and bruises offers herbs when she can yarrow for cuts, willow bark for aches, but the stores run low in winter, and they are not always for you. A freeman's pain is a concern. A thrall's pain is an inconvenience. You are still expected to appear capable. You are still expected to complete the same list of tasks, regardless of whether your breath rattles or your joints seize. If you slow down, you are asked if you're lazy. If you answer, you are told not to speak back. Your body, for all its burdens, is still considered a form of wealth not to you, but to the one who owns you. If you are strong, you are valuable. If you are young, you are useful. If you are clever with your hands, you might be spared some labor. But this, too, is precarious. A thrall who becomes too skilled might be envied. A thrall who grows too confident might be seen as dangerous. And so, you learn not just how to work, but how to perform to seem capable, but not proud, useful, but not threatening, invisible, but indispensable. Even your posture reflects this balance. You stoop slightly, not from habit, but from caution. You speak softly. You avoid direct eye contact unless given permission. You walk at a pace that says, I am here, but not, I am in the way. And always, beneath it all, is the quiet truth. You are your body, and your body is not yours. If you are injured too badly to recover, your value is gone. Some thralls are cast out, others are simply left to fade, given smaller tasks until they can no longer complete even those. A few are sold, if anyone will take them. The rest are buried quietly, without ceremony. There are no gravestones for thralls, no family plots, no remembered dates. Just earth, and the faint memory that someone once carried water here. Every now and then, a rumour reaches your ears hushed, uncertain, passed between thralls during a shared chore or whispered in the dusk when no one else is listening. A thrall in the next village, it is said, was granted freedom after 20 years of loyal service. Another, older than most, was released by a dying master as an act of honour before his last breath. And once, though it's harder to believe, someone claims that a man saved enough silver from odd jobs, from the generosity of traders, from secret exchanges, and bought his own release. The stories flicker like candlelight in the fog, distant, fragile, but they exist, and because they exist, they persist. Freedom. The word itself feels heavy on the tongue, like something you shouldn't say aloud, not because it is forbidden, but because it feels foreign, as though it belongs to someone else entirely. You try to imagine it. You try to picture your days without the morning haul of water, without the low ache in your hands, without waiting for someone else's command to move. And yet, even the idea feels dangerous, like looking too long at the sun, best to glance and move on. Still, freedom does come, sometimes. A thrall who proves exceptionally loyal, who serves a single household for many years without complaint, who raises the master's children, who tends the sick, who never falters, may be rewarded. Not often, not easily, but it happens. The act of freeing a slave is called losen in the old tongue. It may be written into a will or declared publicly during a feast as a show of generosity and power. Some do it for spiritual reasons, believing that manumission pleases the gods, especially in old age, when men begin to think of their legacy and the afterlife. Others do it as a gesture, with terms. The freed thrall may still owe labour for several years, or may be given a small plot of land but no tools. The freedom is partial, conditional, shaped as much by expectation as by mercy. If you are freed, you become a lazingi, a freed person. You gain a kind of legal status, somewhere between slave and freeborn. You can marry, own modest property, testify in court. But the shadow of your past lingers. You may still be called the former thrall. You may not be allowed to wed into certain families. You may be remembered not for what you do now, but for what you once were. And yet, it is something. It is more than most receive. Some freed thralls choose to stay with the same household, taking on paid work, advising younger servants, living quietly in a small corner of the land. Others try to leave to start anew, to find a place where no one knows their name. But it is hard. Trust comes slowly. Doors do not open easily. You have met one such man. He comes to trade sometimes, a wiry figure with a limp, a thick beard, and eyes that do not linger long in one place. He speaks carefully, never too much, never too little. You heard once, from the older woman in the kitchen, that he was once a thrall like you, that he earned his freedom, that he still works harder than most free men because he knows how easily it can all disappear. You watched him once, as he stood in the yard, loading goods onto his cart. He moved with efficiency, but also something else, something quieter, deeper, a kind of ownership. He looked at the land as if it belonged to him, or perhaps, more accurately, as if he belonged to no one. The sight of him stayed with you for days. And sometimes, when you walk to the stream at dawn, or scrape burnt porridge from the bottom of the pot, or lie awake listening to the wind move through the cracks in the wall, you remember him, and you wonder not with hope exactly, but with a kind of quiet ache whether your story might take a similar turn. Whether you too might one day walk freely with your head unbowed, carrying only what you choose to carry. Not today, probably not soon, but perhaps someday. And until then, you carry this life the way you carry the water, carefully, steadily, without spilling more than you can bear. The sagas speak of kings, of warriors, of men who crossed oceans in longships carved with dragons, whose names echo still across the northern winds. They speak of chieftains, raiders, seers, and queens' figures wrapped in glory and fate, who carved their lives into the stone of history with sword and fire. They do not speak of you. There is no saga for the thrall who wakes before the dawn and carries buckets through mud. No verse for the woman who grinds grain until her fingers crack. No tale for the boy who fetches wood in silence, or the girl who learns to tie knots faster than the master's son. But you are there, in every saga, hidden behind the curtains, beneath the benches, beyond the edges of the firelight. Every great hall required hands to sweep its floor. Every feast needed someone to salt the meat. Every ship, no matter how famed, was once loaded with supplies by those who would never set sail. History remembers the loud, the victorious, the dangerous, but it is built on the backs of the quiet. You are not remembered by name, but your labor shaped the world nonetheless. The longhouse stands because you patched its roof. The livestock thrives because you rose each morning before the sun. The child grows strong because you watched them, fed them, clothed them, taught them to walk. Even your silence was a kind of strength. There were moments, you recall them now, when the rhythm of the day broke just slightly, and something else crept in. A piece of music hummed while gathering herbs. A look shared with another thrall while lifting stones. A moment of stillness by the river, where the wind rippled the surface and you saw your reflection not as a servant, but simply as a person. These were small moments, brief, often forgotten, but they were yours. And as the years passed, your body changed. Callosed hands, silvering hair, slower steps. The tasks grew heavier. The cold settled in earlier, but your awareness deepened. You saw more, understood more. You became a keeper of unspoken truths of who really stole the bread, who cried at night, who left the door unlatched in spring. You carried all of it, quietly, carefully. And now, as we leave your story behind, we do not leave you behind. We remember the unremembered, the thralls, the nameless, the ones who bent beneath history's weight but did not break. You lived without freedom, but not without dignity. You worked without thanks, but not without worth. You endured, and in that, you left a mark no less real than any carved in runestone. Now, as the longhouse grows still, and the embers fade, we prepare to step into another tale, one of war and wandering, of a man whose life burned across the world like a falling star. But before we do, we pause. And in that pause, we remember you. He was not born a legend. He was born a younger brother. Before the crowns, before the swords, before the marches and the myths, Harald Sigurdsson was simply a quiet boy growing up in the fjords of Norway in the early years of the 11th century. The world he entered was rough, splintered, and uncertain. The age of the Vikings was beginning to transform, turning from raids and scattered kings into something heavier, more organized and more violent. Harold was born in 1015 to a minor noble family. His half-brother, however, was already a rising force in Norwegian politics and faith. His name was Olaf Haraldsson, and he had returned from years abroad as a Christian convert and warrior, determined to unify Norway under one crown and under the banner of Christ. Imagine being a child in that shadow. Olaf was bold, charismatic, devout, and uncompromising. He burned pagan temples, fought rival chieftains, imposed Christian law, and clashed with powerful neighbours like Denmark and Sweden. For many Norwegians, he was a tyrant. For others, a hero. For Harold, he was a living god. The boy watched from a distance as Olaf turned his ambition into conquest and conquest into disaster. By the time Harold was a teenager, Olaf had lost his grip on the kingdom. In 1028, King Canute, the Great of Denmark and England, sailed north with a fleet and allies among Norway's own people. Olaf fled, and then, in 1030, returned to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. And young Harold, just 15 years old, followed him. The Battle of Stiklestad was brutal. One of the most famous in Norse history, it marked not only the fall of Olaf, but the symbolic death of the old ways. Olaf was killed by his own countrymen, struck down in the mud and chaos of civil war, and Harold, too young to lead but old enough to bleed, was gravely wounded, yet he survived. The image of that day, the mud, the shouting, the thundering hooves, the press of shields, never left him. His brother died for a vision, for a kingdom, for a god, and Harold limped away with neither. He became an exile. Wounded and alone, he fled eastward, first across the rugged mountain passes into Sweden, then beyond, into the lands of the Rus, and eventually to a place no Viking child had ever expected to see. Miklagard, the Norse name for Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a place of stone and silk, of gold-leaf manuscripts and endless rituals, of priests in black robes and mosaics, so bright they looked like frozen fire. There, in that distant world, Harold traded his name for coin and entered the service of the emperor. The Byzantines had long employed foreign mercenaries, warriors from far-off lands who were brave, brutal, and expendable. Harold would become one of them, a soldier in the legendary Varangian Guard. But not yet. First, he trained, observed, endured. He learned new languages, new customs, new tactics. He stood in marble halls that echoed like cathedrals and felt smaller than he ever had. He fought side by side with men who had no stories of Odin, no songs of Thor, only prayers in Greek and flickering candles for saints whose names he could barely pronounce. Still, he watched and remembered. In the Norse lands, he had been the brother of a dead king. But in Byzantium, he had no past, only a blade, a foreign name, and the determination not to be forgotten again. What drove him? Was it revenge, restlessness, the need to rise beyond his brother's shadow? No one can say for certain. But one thing is clear. Even at 15, Harold was not merely surviving. He was already collecting what every future king needs: stories, scars, and silence. The kind of silence that holds something sharp inside. In Constantinople, he was a stranger. His hair too light, his language too rough. His prayers, when he said them, pointed north instead of east. But the emperor did not care. The empire needed swords, not manners, and Harold Sigurdsson, now little more than a wandering mercenary, had arrived at the right time. The year was 1030. Byzantium was vast, powerful, and restless. Its borders stretched like a map drawn in sand, always changing, always challenged. Normans to the west, Arabs to the south. Bulgarians along the rivers, Pechenegs on the steppe. Internal rebellions that sparked like dry grass in summer. The empire was old, but it bled constantly. This was where the Varangian Guard came in. They were the emperor's personal guard foreigners, often Norse, Anglo-Saxon, or Russ, chosen for their loyalty to coin over politics. They wore heavy cloaks, tall axes, and an expressionless silence. They stood in the throne room, unmoved as rivals begged or wept before the emperor. They followed him into battle and guarded his sleep. They were outsiders trusted to watch over an insider's world. Harold joined them as a young man of no status, but not for long. His height alone set him apart tall even among Norsemen, and his experience at Stickelstad, though a loss, had given him something rare for someone so young. He had already seen a king fall, already felt the crush of battle, already learned not to flinch when the world collapses. He rose quickly, campaign after campaign, to Asia Minor, where deserts breathed heat and horses died of thirst, to Sicily, where Greek and Arabic words danced in the streets and soldiers fell to illness faster than to blades, to the Holy Land, where the empire fought to hold its sacred ground, and every village was a tinderbox, even to the waters of the Black Sea, where Viking ships once raided now turned to carrying imperial banners instead of pillaged loot. Harold did not fight for plunder, he fought for pay, for experience, for reputation. He became known among his fellow guards as precise, careful, and brutal when needed, a warrior who didn't waste motion, didn't boast, didn't drink too deeply, and always returned from patrol with fewer men than he left with, but never fewer coins. And slowly, his name began to shift. The Byzantines called him Araltes, a smoother form for their tongues. Documents from the time list his deeds in the dry language of record keepers. He fought in the south. He pacified rebels. He led 60 men through the mountains. But behind the lines of ink was something real. A northern man reshaping himself, one sword stroke at a time. We don't know what he felt during these years. There are no letters, no diary, only fragments, a scar noted in a later poem, a Byzantine record of a promotion, a Norse saga written long after his death. But we can guess. He must have felt distant from home, the food unfamiliar, the customs rigid, the grandeur of the imperial court overwhelming at times. He would have stood beneath mosaics of gold, heard choirs sing in tongues he could not follow, seen the emperor pass by in robes sewn with pearls. And yet, for all its splendor, Byzantium was not his world. He served it, but did not belong to it. That, perhaps, was the hardest part. To be useful but not welcome, honored but never truly embraced. He was still a hired blade, a sword from the snow, cutting through the dust of southern wars. It's easy to imagine the battlefield swords, shouting, blood in the dust. But Harold's years in Byzantium weren't only made of campaigns. Many of his longest battles were silent, political, patient. Constantinople was not like the north. It was not ruled by open strength or brute charisma. It was a world of ritual, of protocol, of eyes watching from behind silks and latticed walls. Everything meant something. The way you bowed, the phrasing of a request, the order in which you entered a room. And Harold had to learn. In the field, he had become a commander, not in title, but in practice. He led men across deserts, negotiated with tribal chiefs, escorted Byzantine nobles through rebel lands, and returned alive. He earned silver, status, and favor. And yet, in the capital, he was still only a barbarian in the eyes of many. The Varangian Guard stood close to power but far from it. They guarded emperors but did not advise them. They wore gold-stitched cloaks but lived in stone barracks near the sea. When the court held feasts, the guards stood by the walls, unmoving, while roasted meat and string music passed by like another world. Harold saw it all, the wealth, the grace, the schemes. He learned to speak Greek not fluently but well enough to understand orders, threats, and whispers. He learned when to remain still and when to speak. He learned the difference between silence and consent. The emperors changed, as emperors often did. There was Romanos III, proud and overmatched, whose campaigns ended in confusion. Then Michael IV, a former money changer turned ruler by marriage and cunning. And then the boy emperor Michael V, whose reign was short and loud. Harold saw them rise and fall. He fought for each, not out of loyalty, but duty, the kind of duty born from contract and caution. During this time, Harold's name grew quietly. He became wealthy by soldiers' standards. Some sources say he sent gold back to Norway, hiding it with merchants or trusted kin. Others say he stored it in Constantinople itself, guarded by oath and account. What's certain is that he was no longer the penniless boy who fled Stiklestad. He had become something else. Not noble, not Greek, not entirely Norse anymore either. He was becoming adaptable. There is a moment mentioned in later sagas, half legend, half memory, in which Harold is said to have composed poetry during these years, verses in the Old Norse style, recited under his breath between battles. If true, it suggests something important, that even while far from home, he carried the rhythm of it with him. There were rumours, too, of ambition. Some believed Harold wanted to marry into the imperial family, that he sought the hand of a noblewoman, maybe even a niece of the emperor himself. If that was true, it failed, or perhaps it never happened at all. Byzantium kept its secrets well, but ambition cannot be hidden forever. By the early 1040s, Harold had seen enough, fought enough, saved enough. He had built a name, built wealth, built connections, and he began to think of home not as the place he left, but as the place he might return to on his own terms. Not as the brother of Saint Olaf, but as Harold, whole and independent, with scars, gold, and men loyal to him. He had walked the marble corridors of emperors, slept beneath domes painted with saints, stood at the side of rulers who saw themselves as God-appointed, and still he had not bowed. Not truly. He was not made to serve. And Byzantium, for all its glory, was never his. Harold left Byzantium the way a shadow slips from a room, quietly, carefully, leaving no trace but absence. No saga tells us exactly why or how. The Byzantine records are sparse. The Norse accounts contradict each other. Some say he fled, some say he was released. Some even whisper of imprisonment, of betrayal, of a daring escape from the imperial court after offending someone too powerful. But all agree on this: Harald Hardrada left Miklagard a different man than the boy who entered it. He had spent more than a decade in foreign wars, across deserts and mountains, behind palace walls and before angry crowds. He had worn silk-lined armour. He had counted coins stamped with a foreign emperor's face. He had spoken commands in more than one tongue. He had seen cities burn and watched empires tighten their belts. And now he turned north again, back through the rivers of the Rus, back across the steppes, back through snow and pine and fjord. He was no longer nameless, no longer poor, no longer a brother trailing in the wake of a saint. He was Harold the Tall, Harold the Hard, Harold who had stood before emperors and not flinched. When he returned to the north, likely around 1045, Norway was not the country he had left. His half-brother Olaf had become a saint, martyred at Stiklestad, his memory now wrapped in holiness. Churches bore his name. His death, once a failure, was now retold as sacrifice. And on the throne sat Magnus the Good, Olaf's son, Harold's own nephew. It would have been easy to raise a sword, to declare himself rightful heir, to spill blood over lineage. But Harold, shaped by years of Byzantine diplomacy, chose a different path. He offered Magnus a proposal: joint rule. In exchange for half the kingdom, Harold would share his war chest, the gold he had gathered in service to the empire. Magnus, still young and facing threats from Denmark, agreed. And so, without a single battle, Harold returned to power. A man who had left as a fugitive now ruled as a king. But peace was never his goal. He looked west, to Denmark, where King Sweyn resisted Norwegian influence, and beyond that, across the sea, to England, where the Anglo-Saxon throne was beginning to wobble. Harold had no claim there. But claims can be made, titles invented, justifications shaped like swords. For now, though, he settled. He ruled. He relearned the land of his birth. He heard the wind through pine, the crash of waves on northern rocks. He slept again under a sky with stars he recognized. But something in him remained restless. Perhaps it was the memory of palace marble, or the unfinished sentence left behind in Byzantium, or the quiet promise made to himself beneath the shattered banners of Stickelstad, that one day he would not serve. He would rule. Completely. Without compromise. Harold was a king now by treaty, by title, and by the slow grind of necessity. But he was not content. For a man who had survived empires and exile, who had commanded men on 3 continents, ruling half of Norway must have felt insufficient. The hills and coasts of his homeland were familiar, yes, but they were not grand, not golden, not enough. He co-ruled Norway with Magnus the Good for a time, but co-ruling is rarely peaceful. Tensions lingered. 2 men, 1 throne, 1 crown too many. In 1047, the issue resolved itself. Magnus died young, some say of illness, others quietly suspect poison, but there is no proof, only silence. Whatever the cause, Harold became the sole ruler of Norway. He had, at last, what so many men kill for. And yet, he could not sit still. Almost immediately, he turned his attention to Denmark. Magnus had once ruled there as well, but the Danes had since rallied behind King Svein Estridsson, a clever man with powerful allies. To Harold, Denmark was unfinished business, a loose end, a missing piece. From 1047 to 1064, nearly 2 decades, Harold launched repeated invasions of Denmark. Every summer, ships sailed from the fjords. Every autumn, they returned with loot, with captives, with scars, but never with the crown. The Danes called him Hardrathi Harold the Ruthless, not in anger, but in recognition. He was methodical, cold, a tactician more than a brute. His raids burned towns, took silver, shattered alliances, but he never gained the throne. Still, he persisted. Even as he aged, Harold remained tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding. His beard turned grey, but his eyes lost none of their sharpness. He still trained with younger warriors, still recited poetry by firelight, still planned campaigns with maps weighted by stones. And he ruled Norway with a firm hand. He built roads, strengthened defences, tightened laws. He crushed rebellions. One saga speaks of him blinding a man who disobeyed an order. Another claims he kept spies in every region listening for unrest, sniffing out disloyalty. But he was not cruel without reason. His laws brought order. His taxes paid for roads and ships. He rewarded loyalty generously, and those closest to him often spoke of his wit, his memory, his ability to recall verses and lineages with ease. He was no longer just a warrior. He had become a statesman, a ruler, a symbol. But symbols are never satisfied. Harold had lost Stickelstad. He had wandered for years, fought in foreign deserts, escaped an empire, taken a crown. And still, there was something missing. Perhaps it was legacy. Perhaps it was destiny. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that the sea, once you've sailed it far enough, never stops calling. And across that sea lay a kingdom whispered about for years. England, a land of wealth, of shifting rulers, of uncertain heirs. And for Harold, a final chapter not yet written. The winds carried whispers. In 1064, peace was finally made between Harold and Sweyn of Denmark. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Norway was not at war. The coast was quiet, the longships rested. And yet, Harold did not. He turned his eyes west to England. For decades, England had been a battlefield of kings and claims. The great Knut, the great Danish ruler of England, had died in 1035. His sons followed, briefly, one after another, Harold Harefoot, Harthacnut, until finally the Saxon line returned with Edward the Confessor. But Edward died in January of 1066, and suddenly the throne of England was open. Not empty, of course. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, claimed it for himself. The White Nagamot, England's council of nobles, supported him. But claims do not live in peace for long. From the south, William of Normandy prepared his ships, citing promises and blood ties. And from the north, Harold Hardrada watched, calculating. Did he have a claim? A legal right, perhaps not a strong one, but that had never stopped men like him before. He argued that King Magnus, his former co-ruler, had once been promised the English throne by Harthacnut, and that since Harold had inherited Magnus's lands, he had also inherited that right. It was thin, but in the 11th century, few thrones were claimed with thick reasons. And so, he planned. He gathered ships, around 300 longships, some sources say. He called up warriors from across Norway. He allied with Tostig Godwinson, Harold's own disgraced brother, who sought revenge and return. He packed supplies, sharpened blades, recited old verses, and waited for the right weather. In late summer 1066, Harold set sail for England. He was over 50 years old. He had outlived most men of his age and rank. He had fought across continents, survived emperors, ruled kingdoms. And now, in the last year of his life, he launched his boldest campaign yet. They landed at the River Humber and marched inland. The first resistance came at Gate Fulford, near York, where Harold's forces crushed the English defenders on the 20th of September. Victory was swift, complete. The city of York promised surrender. The Norwegians were triumphant. Harold made camp, set terms, waited for hostages. Perhaps, in those days between battles, he allowed himself a moment of pride, a moment of rest. But England does not rest for long. Just days later, on the 25th of September, Harold Godwinson arrived. He had marched his army north in just 4 days, a feat of endurance and resolve. Harold, caught off guard, rallied his men. They rushed toward the battlefield Stamford Bridge in light armour, many without helmets. They had not expected battle that day. But battle found them, and the last saga of Harold Hardrada was about to be written in the mud, the steel, and the sudden chill of an English autumn. The field was uneven, wet with dew, the sun barely up, and the sky above Stamford Bridge was quiet for now. Harold stood tall as always, towering in fact. He wore a blue tunic, no mail, perhaps expecting peace, perhaps underestimating Harold Godwinson's speed. The English approached in tight ranks, fresh, determined, and most of all, unexpected. Harold's men scrambled to form a line, some still down by the river, others rushing from camp. Their armour light, their formation loose, their breath unsteady from the sudden march to battle. Still, they fought. One Norse warrior held the narrow bridge alone, swinging a great axe, buying time. Some say he cut down 20 men before falling, pierced from beneath by a spear slipped through the planks. His name is not recorded, but his defiance lingers in saga. Harold led from the front. Always from the front. He had survived battles in Sicily, in the Holy Land, in Bulgaria and beyond. He had seen kings fall, had watched cities burn, had sailed rivers under 6 banners. He had defied emperors, dethroned rivals, marched through marble courts. But here, in a green English meadow, it ended. An arrow quick, impersonal struck his throat. The sagas say he died standing, his body pierced, his voice silent. In that moment, the army fractured. The Norse broke. Some fled. Others died where they stood. The dream of taking England withered in a single day. Tostig fell beside him. The ships that had carried them were set ablaze or abandoned. When the surviving Norse asked for peace, Harold Godwinson allowed them to leave, but only enough ships for those who remained. Out of the vast fleet Harold had brought from Norway, only 24 ships sailed home. The rest were ash and memory. So ended the life of Harold Hardrada, Harold the Hard Ruler. He died not in his homeland, not even in the empire that once paid him in gold and silence, but on a foreign field, chasing a crown that would never be his. And yet, he was no ordinary conqueror. He was the last great Viking king, the final echo of a world of longships and sagas, of scalds and sword oaths. His death at Stamford Bridge marked more than the end of a campaign, it marked the end of an era. Just weeks later, William the Conqueror would land at Hastings. The Norman Age would begin, the world would change. But Harold came first. And for a brief moment, as the English grass stained with northern blood, the past and future met and passed each other in silence. Imagine you are walking through the countryside of southern Sweden. The sky is overcast, the grass is thick with morning dew. A narrow path winds through old farmland, where stones rise up in clusters, standing like forgotten sentinels of time. Among them, one stands out. It is tall over 8 feet and covered in runes. You are looking at the Rook runestone, one of the most mysterious and heavily inscribed stones in all of Scandinavia. It stands near the small village of Ruk, carved sometime in the early 9th century, likely around 800 CE. But even now, more than 1,200 years later, scholars still argue about what exactly it means. The stone is covered in over *** 700 runes, arranged in cryptic sequences, unusual meter, and obscure references. Some parts are damaged, others deliberately encoded. It is not just a simple memorial or property marker, it is something else, a puzzle left by someone who wanted to speak to the future in riddles. And so, the question, what does it say? To begin with, the runes were carved in Old Norse, but using a mix of poetic structure and allusion rarely seen on other stones. The text moves between styles, prose, verse, even ciphered language. Some passages reference heroic deeds, others refer to mythic creatures. Some sections seem historical, while others border on the apocalyptic. The stone begins with a dedication. A man named Varin carved it in memory of his son, Varmoth, who died young. A father's grief, etched in stone. But what follows is far from straightforward lament. It speaks of Theodoric the Great, a Gothic king who ruled in Italy some 300 years earlier, an unusual and distant reference for a Norse monument. Why mention him? Was Varin comparing his son to this legendary ruler? Or was the name symbolic, representing something lost, a shattered kingdom, or a hero gone too soon? Then the tone shifts. It references twilight battles, 9 generations of warriors, supernatural events, and cryptic horseborn beings. There are phrases that echo the Ragnarok myth, the Norse end of the world, though never directly. Instead, the language feels like a whisper of something ominous, a veiled warning. What makes interpretation even harder is that some of the runes are encoded using runic riddles, alternate forms of symbols, mirror writing, or number patterns. It's as though Varin didn't just want to be remembered, he wanted to be decoded. For years, scholars have puzzled over the stone. Some believe it tells a lost myth, one we no longer have in surviving manuscripts. Others argue it is a political statement, perhaps referencing intertribal war or a great loss caused by climate disaster. One recent theory from researchers in Sweden links the Rook stone to a period of climatic upheaval. In the mid-500s CE, a massive volcanic eruption had caused years of darkness and crop failure across the northern world. Though this was centuries before the stone's carving, the memory may have lingered. Some believe the Roke inscription refers to fears of another such catastrophe, a father expressing cosmic dread alongside personal grief. It is also possible that the stone was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps Varin carved it for the gods, or for himself. A final act of mourning that used layers of myth and metaphor to express something beyond words. The runestone stood beside a church for centuries before being moved slightly to preserve it. Even now, it stands outdoors, exposed to the same sky that watched it rise over a millennium ago. If you stood beside it today and ran your fingers over its edges, you'd feel the grooves where the chisel bit into granite, deliberate, slow, and deep, like someone trying to carve not just words, but memory itself into the earth. No one alive can read it with certainty, and perhaps that is the point. The Ruk runestone does not just ask to be read, it asks to be wondered at. And in that wondering, in the not knowing, it becomes something more than text. It becomes presence. There is something haunting about the silence of old stones. The Ruk runestone has stood in the same spot for more than 1,000 years, through storms and snowfall, through plagues, wars, and the rise and fall of nations. It has seen the sky change, but it has not moved. It simply remains tall, carved, watching. In the centuries after its creation, the stone slowly faded from view. It stood beside a small wooden church, largely unnoticed, its carvings weathering with wind and rain. The stories it told, already cryptic, grew fainter, less understood. Runes blurred, lines cracked. Generations passed. By the time Christianization spread through Sweden in earnest, the meaning of such stones had already begun to vanish. New faith, new language, new symbols. The runestones, once so vital, became curiosities. Some were used as building materials, others buried. A few, like Ruk, survived simply because no one bothered to move them. And yet, they waited. In the 19th century, something changed. Scholars across Europe began to take interest in the Norse past, not just the sagas, but the inscriptions. Language historians, archaeologists, poets. They came with notebooks, ink, and eventually cameras. They crouched before the stones and traced their fingers along the grooves. In 1862, the Roke stone was finally given detailed attention. Scholars transcribed its runes, compared them to other inscriptions, and published studies. But the deeper they looked, the stranger the message became. Each theory only deepened the mystery. One scholar believed the runestone told of solar eclipses, encoded through poetic metaphor. Another thought it contained prophecies, perhaps warnings tied to ancient calendars or astronomical events. Still others proposed that it was written in a lost poetic code, meant only to be understood by a small group, possibly a priesthood or elite family line. And in recent years, with the help of digital imaging and linguistic modeling, new ideas have emerged. Some experts now think the inscription's strange transitions from myth to history to riddles might mirror the way memory itself functions. That is, the stone was never meant to be read linearly, but instead experienced like a series of echoes, the way grief returns not in order, but in waves. There's also growing support for the idea that the runestone reflects not just grief, but climate fear. In the mid-6th century, volcanic eruptions had caused what some call a volcanic winter, years of poor harvests, dying livestock, and strange atmospheric phenomena. Though the rock stone was carved centuries later, oral traditions may have kept these events alive. The cold sun, the short seasons, the unpredictability of the world, these were not abstract fears. They were lived ones. And for a father like Varin, who had lost his son, perhaps too real to ignore, the runestone then becomes more than a monument. It becomes an interface between past and future, between one man's sorrow and a culture's cosmic anxiety, a bridge of symbols, a frozen poem, a map of a mind trying to make sense of grief and time. And perhaps that is why it endures, because the fear of forgetting is still with us. If we try to imagine how the people of Varin's time engaged with the Rook runestone, we must let go of the idea that it was simply meant to be read once. This was not a public notice, nor an inscription meant for every passer-by. It is more likely that the stone served a ceremonial or ritual function, something closer to an altar than a book. It may have been the centerpiece of seasonal gatherings, where Scald's Norse poets would chant or interpret parts of the inscription aloud. Or perhaps the family of Varin maintained its memory through oral repetition, treating the stone as a holy relic rather than just a memorial. Other runestones of the Viking Age are more straightforward. They declare who built a bridge, who died at sea, or who owned a piece of land. But the rock stone resists that utility. It was created with care and intention, yet without clarity, not because the carver lacked skill, but because he sought mystery. Compared to other inscriptions of the era, the Roke runestone stands apart not in size, but in ambition. It tries to do more than commemorate. It tries to invoke, to pull together strands of myth, memory, and perhaps even prophecy into one enduring object. Today, visitors to the stone often describe a feeling of quiet awe. The air around it seems stiller somehow, not because of magic, but because of the long shadow it casts, not just physically, but across time. To stand before it is to feel how small we are and how desperately we want our words to last. There is a phrase scholars often use when speaking of runestones like the one at Rook: intentional ambiguity. It refers to the idea that some messages are crafted not to be fully understood, but to remain open-layered, evocative, unsettling. The rock runestone is perhaps the most famous example of this, but it is not the only one. Across Scandinavia, hundreds of stones stand carved with runes, some plain, some poetic, many eroded by time. They stretch from Denmark to Iceland, from Sweden to the Orkneys. Each tells a piece of the Norse story, but few match Rook in density or mystery. Why was this one so different? Part of the answer lies in its length. The Roke stone has the longest surviving runic inscription known, over 700 characters, carved not just on the front, but wrapping around the sides and even on the top. It is a stone that insists on being walked around, pondered from all angles. And then there is its structure. Unlike most runestones, which follow a clear narrative or announcement, the Rook inscription flows like a dream. It moves between topics: grief, myth, heroic tales, riddles without linear logic. Some sections speak in verse, others shift tense or perspective. The more one reads, the less clear the message becomes. But that does not mean it lacks purpose. There is an ancient belief shared across many cultures that knowledge itself can be dangerous, that certain truths should be hidden, layered beneath symbol and metaphor. The Norse had their own version of this idea. In their myths, Odin, the god of wisdom, gave up an eye to drink from the well of knowledge. Even he could not grasp truth without sacrifice. Perhaps Varin, the father who carved the Rook stone, understood this. Perhaps he feared that simple truths would fade, that only layered ones would survive. It's possible that the stone is a kind of memory vault, not meant to be understood by outsiders, but preserved for a specific lineage or priesthood or future age. A message in a bottle, launched not into the sea but into time. This idea gains strength when we look at cipher runes which appear on the rock stone. These are altered characters disguised, rotated, or coded. Scholars believe they required insider knowledge to decode. They were not simply decorative. They served to conceal certain names or messages. But conceal from whom? From enemies? From common folk? Or from time itself? There's a theory that the rogue stone may reflect a shift in world views from oral to literate, from public to private, from communal memory to coded legacy. In this view, the stone becomes a marker of transformation not just in grief or belief, but in cognition. We often imagine the past as simpler, but the rogue stone reminds us that complexity is ancient. It challenges the assumption that early medieval Scandinavians were only warriors and raiders. It shows us a mind capable of abstraction, metaphor, encryption. A culture that saw the power in hiding as much as in revealing. And so, we stand before the stone today, not as conquerors of its meaning, but as humble visitors. We bring our translations, our theories, our tools. We shine lasers across its surface, feed runes into digital models, publish papers, and still, it eludes us. Still, it whispers rather than speaks. Still, it waits. There is power in what is not said. In Norse culture, silence could speak volumes. A look, a pause, a name withheld, these could carry more weight than 1,000 boasts. In sagas, the wisest characters often spoke last. The gods themselves, especially Odin, were known for their indirect speech, their riddling answers, their preference for symbols over plain declarations. This reverence for mystery was not unique to the Norse. Across the ancient world, cultures developed sacred languages and ritual codes. The Egyptians had hieroglyphs that functioned not only as text but as magic. The Greeks used oracles whose utterances required interpretation. In the East, sacred texts were often memorized rather than read, their meaning layered across commentaries and generations. The Roke runestone may reflect a similar sensibility, that the act of carving, of preserving, was itself more important than simple clarity. The ambiguity may not be a flaw, but a feature, a way of protecting sacred knowledge, or of acknowledging that grief, memory, and myth resist easy explanation. By embedding riddles and fragmented references into the stone, Varin may have been trying to ensure that meaning would not decay, that those who stood before the stone would always have to work to question, to wonder, to ask, and in doing so, they would keep the memory alive. Even now, that memory persists, not because we understand it, but because we don't. If you were to approach the rock runestone today, you might notice how it stands not alone, but amidst the quiet presence of a small Swedish village. The fields stretch gently around it. A nearby church chimes on the hour, and yet the stone exerts a gravity all its own, as if time bends slightly in its presence. Though it was once largely forgotten, the Roke stone has become a subject of reverence, again in modern times, not religious, perhaps, but cultural. It now resides in a protected setting, open to visitors, yet still exposed to the sky, just as it has been for centuries. And people come, not in crowds, not in busloads, but in twos and threes. Scholars, tourists, locals, sometimes even children from nearby schools. They stand in silence. They read the plaques. They try to trace the runes with their eyes. Many leave with more questions than answers. What is it that draws us to stones like this? Perhaps it is the weight of endurance, the fact that something created in one man's grief can outlive empires, ideologies, and languages. Or perhaps it is the unresolved nature of its message. The human mind is not designed to let go of puzzles easily. We want to solve, to interpret, to know. But the rookstone does not yield easily. Even today, debate continues. Linguists and archaeologists return to it again and again, armed with newer tools. 3D scans, digital reconstructions, machine learning models of Old Norse syntax. And yet, full understanding remains just out of reach. One particularly compelling theory suggests the stone was meant to be read out loud, and that the rhythm of its verse held as much meaning as the words themselves. In this light, the inscription becomes more like music, a composition of meaning and meter. Another theory considers the possibility that the stone was meant to initiate someone into a form of sacred or poetic knowledge, that its riddles and fragmentary style were a kind of test requiring both memory and intuition. If so, then the rookstone is not a statement, but a threshold, a doorway into something older, stranger, quieter. It is perhaps this idea of the stone as passage that resonates most deeply with modern visitors. We are no longer part of Varin's world. We do not share his myths, or his fears, or his sense of time. But we recognize the impulse to speak across generations, to shape something that outlasts us, to turn love and loss into form. As the sun sets on the fields around Roke, the stone glows faintly under the changing light. The runes, though worn, catch the shadow in such a way that some still shine. The air cools. The place grows quiet. And if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with something slower, deeper, you might feel it. The echo of meaning, not fully grasped, but still present. Waiting. In an age of instant answers, perhaps part of the rookstone's power lies in its resistance. We are used to clarity, to digital translations, to encyclopedias and search results. When we encounter a message that refuses to yield, that shrugs off explanation, it feels almost alien. And yet, deeply human. We have always built monuments, not just to honor the dead, but to anchor ourselves, to leave behind a part of our thinking, a stone that says, "We were here, we wondered, we remembered." There is something comforting about the idea that knowledge isn't always immediate, that mystery has its own sacred space, that not every story must be solved to be meaningful. And so, the rookstone becomes a mirror, not just of Varin's world, but of ours. It reflects our desire for permanence in a fleeting world. It reminds us that even in times of grief or upheaval, people found ways to reach beyond themselves to chisel something enduring into the face of stone. The fact that we are still reading it, still wondering about it, over 1,000 years later, that may be its greatest success. For as long as questions remain, memory lives on. It is easy to forget that the rookstone is not just a monument, it is also a voice from a moment in time. And that voice, though chiseled in stone, carries with it the weight of real lives, real fears, real longing. In the world of Varin, the cycles of nature and myth were inseparable. The seasons turned like chapters in a cosmic story. Spring was rebirth, winter a reminder of endings. Thunder was not just weather, but the hammer of Thor, and the sun, the very sun, could disappear, swallowed by wolves, if the stories proved true. When you lose a child in such a world, the grief is not just personal, it touches everything. Many now believe that Varin carved the stone not just to honor his son, but to connect his loss to something greater, to locate it within a pattern, even if that pattern brought no comfort. The references to ancient kings, to battles across generations, to riddles and threats from myth, these may not be separate ideas, but parts of a whole. His son, Varmuth, had died. But perhaps Varin refused to let that death stand alone. Instead, he surrounded it with context, with echoes, with language that pointed outward as much as inward. His sorrow became a lens through which to view history, the future, and even the cosmos. Some researchers have suggested that the runestone may reflect a very early form of historical writing, not in the modern sense of dates and facts, but in its impulse to connect the personal to the collective. To understand one event by weaving it into the flow of generations. In that way, the Rokestone is more than grief, it is philosophy. And it is not the only stone to try such a thing. Other runestones in Scandinavia have begun to receive renewed attention for similar reasons. Scholars are now asking whether what we once saw as decorative or mythic might, in fact, be an early form of complex thought, a way of thinking about time, about the human place within story. The very shape of the Rokestone supports this idea. Its height and angular face suggest not just a canvas for writing, but a kind of monumental book meant to be read slowly, from all sides, with pauses and reflection. It is less a text and more an experience. Walking around it, the physical act of turning becomes part of the message. The sense of motion, of orbiting meaning, of a narrative that never quite ends. This is not accidental, and it may explain why the Rokestone continues to attract not only scholars but artists, poets, and spiritual seekers. It offers no single answer. Instead, it invites you to bring your own, to project your questions into its surface, and to see what echoes come back. Think for a moment about the ways we ourselves attempt to preserve meaning. We keep photographs, we leave letters, we carve names into marble, bronze, wood, we build monuments, write journals, create digital archives. All of these efforts are born from the same impulse, the need to outlast ourselves, to mark that we were here, that something mattered. Varin lived in a world without ink and paper, without bookshelves or cloud storage. What he had was stone cold, heavy, enduring, and so he used it. Not to preserve a single message, but to create a vessel for layered remembrance. There's something beautiful in that. The ambiguity of the Rokestone is not a failure to communicate. It is a recognition that some things cannot be said simply. That grief, especially, resists easy description, so Varin turned to metaphor, to verse, to myth, and to the ancient, weathered symbols of his people, the runes. Each rune carried more than a phonetic sound. It held layers of association. Fehu, the rune for cattle, also meant wealth. Algis, the elk, implied protection. The use of runes was poetic by nature. A single word could suggest an entire landscape of meaning. So when Varin carved, he was not just writing, he was weaving. And as we try to interpret the stone today, we are not solving a puzzle, we are entering a conversation. One that began long ago.
Imagine the cold
and
is
still
behind
has
you
no
now.
end. Now
After
we
days
come
of
to the
travel through
final
frozen
face of the
hills,
stone.
wind-swept
This
coasts,
side
and
is
dense
more
forests,
Some
you
of the
finally
runes have
arrived.
faded almost entirely.
The sky is a thick
Others
gray
remain
curtain,
sharp,
and snow rests
defiant,
heavy on the
clinging
pine
to the
branches.
granite as if unwilling
But
to
ahead,
let go.
through the low mist,
It is here that
the longhouse
rock
comes into view,
inscription ends
solid,
not with clarity
wooden,
but
warm.
with questions.
The warmth hits you
The
first.
last lines are
Not
the most
sharp
cryptic.
heat, but a
They
layered,
reference
smoky
a
warmth, the
horseborn
kind
being,
that
perhaps
seeps into
divine,
bones and
a set of
settles.
9 generations.
Fires smolder
a
in
riddle
long
about
hearths set
sacrifice.
into the center of the
Then
floor.
the runes stop.
Their orange
No
glow
conclusion,
flickers across
no
wooden walls,
summary,
blackened by
just a
decades
sudden
of smoke.
silence.
This is
As
the
if
seat of a
chisel
Jarla
itself
Viking
paused
chieftain.
and never resumed.
Even in quiet hours,
Was
there are
the
always
stone
people,
left
family,
unfinished?
thralls, guards,
Or
children.
was that
They
absence
move around
part
the
of
edges, tending to
message?
tasks.
In some cultures,
Women twist
an
wool into
unfinished
threads, scrape
structure
hides,
is a mark
or
of
ladle stew
humility,
from an iron
a
pot.
sign that perfection
Old men nod
belongs
by the
only to
fire,
the divine.
silent, half
Perhaps
asleep,
the abrupt
warming
ending
their
of the
fingers.
Rockstone is similar.
Children
A
chase
way
one
to
another between
acknowledge
benches
that no
until
text,
hushed by a
no
glance.
story, no
Bread baked
memory
on
can ever
stone,
be truly
smoked fish,
complete,
dried lamb, and sour
especially when it
cheese.
comes to grief.
In the darker seasons,
For over 12
menu is
centuries,
sparse.
the Rock runestone has
but in
stood
feast
in its
times,
place.
after
It
raids
has
or
watched
alliances,
winters come and go.
there may be
It
roast
has
game,
endured Reformation,
honey-sweetened porridge,
revolution, and the quiet
nuts,
turning of
and pickled
generations.
greens.
In that
They recite
time,
lineages.
its meaning has not
Remember
grown
dead
clearer.
heroes, weave
but
myth
its
into memory.
presence has grown deeper.
The hall
The
stills as they
stone now
speak.
serves a different role,
Even the
not
fire
only as
seems
an
too
object
quiet.
of study,
A
but
man
as a
of
kind
means
of
and
meditative
stories,
anchor,
of alliances,
a
of blood
reminder that
feasts and
history does
oaths.
not always
The
present
Jarl
itself
sees
in
who
neat
holds their
chapters,
liquor, who grows
that
too loud,
sometimes
who
what
cannot pace
remains is not
themselves.
the answer,
Battles
but
are
the
planned.
asking.
The
And
longhouse
perhaps
may
that
be
is
grand,
enough.
but it is not
There is a quiet
luxurious.
dignity
Life here
in
is
this
closer to
uncertainty,
survival than
a
comfort.
comfort even
Marriage is
in
arranged.
knowing that others
Grievances
before
aired.
us have faced the same
Something that will be
silence and
remembered
wondered
not
what
because it
meant.
was easy, but
We
because
are
it
not
endured.
alone in our unknowing.
Treaties
We
sworn.
inherit it.
In a world of
We share
reputation
it.
and subtle signals,
Visitors still
even a
come
feast
to the
is
village
political.
of Rook.
And his
They
longhouse
walk
is
the
not just a
gentle
home, it
gravel path.
is a center of power,
They read
memory,
the
and
interpretive
ritual.
plaques.
You step through
Some
the
take
entrance,
photographs.
ducking beneath carved
Others
beams,
just
smoothed
stand
by
there,
time and hands.
quietly,
The
letting
smells
the
are
wind
thick and
brush
strange wood
against their
smoke,
arms
dried
while they
fish,
stare at the
fermented
weathered
grain,
stone.
wet wool, and something sweet, perhaps mead, left open too long. It is not pleasant by modern standards, but it is deeply human. It smells like living. Animal skins and woven tapestries hang here and there, breaking the drafts. The floor is beaten earth, and your boots crunch faintly on dry straw scattered underfoot. His clothes are practical, layered for warmth, but finely woven. A brooch holds his cloak. His beard is gray at the edges. He watches everything quietly and speaks only when needed. A nod, a raised brow. A word or two that settles a matter ends a quarrel. The hall is long and wide, the roof high and pitched to send smoke upward. Benches line the walls. You are not alone. The longhouse is rarely empty. And at the center, near the high seat there, sits the Jarl. He is not dressed as a king might be. This is his hall, and you feel it. At mealtimes, the longhouse transforms. The Jarl's table is laid with wooden platters and knives. Drinking horns are passed around. Mead strong and sweet flows freely, but drunkenness is watched. Skalds, the storytellers, rise to speak. They chant sagas, half-sung, half-spoken. Their voices echo in the smoky rafters. The longhouse is more than shelter. It is the memory palace of this community. Here, generations come and go. And when snow falls heavy outside and night seems to last forever, it is here in this wooden womb of fire and breath and story that the Norse world gathers itself and remembers who it is. But the warmth is never complete. There is always a draft. Always the smell of something just beginning to spoil. And yet to live within its walls, to belong here, is to be part of something lasting. Inside the longhouse, time does not flow the way it does outside. There is no ticking clock, no calendar pinned to the wall. Instead, life moves to subtler rhythms of chores completed, of light shifting through smoke holes in the ceiling, of logs burning down to ash, and of the Jarl's mood. The occasional pop of a sap pocket sends a tiny flurry of sparks upward, only to vanish into the blackened beams above. Footsteps pad softly across the straw-covered floor, some heavy, armored, deliberate. Others, light and barefoot. The soft clink of a blade being sharpened near the fire just habit, not threat. You begin to notice the soundscape. There is the crackle of firewood in the long hearth, soft but constant. Occasionally someone clears their throat or murmurs a greeting. The murmur of voices is low, never frantic.
The Norse
did not chatter idly in the Jarl's hall. Words had weight. Each spoken line was a thread in the social web, and no one wished to pull too hard. It sings in its own ways, craping against wood as it's placed down, sloshing softly when lifted, punctuated by a quiet exhale after each sip. It's brewed by the women of the hall, carefully tended, with herbs added according to season. The Jarl's voice becomes a little louder. He may speak of news of ships seen near the coast, or omens in the sky. Everyone listens. His voice uncertain at first, then stronger as the tale takes hold. He speaks of ancestors, of sea journeys and cursed swords, of oaths sworn in blood. The outer world fades. The snow can fall as it likes, not out of fear, but because his words form the center of the hall's gravity. Not at fixed hours, but when food is ready. There is always some stew, simmering root vegetables, dried meat, and whatever greens could be preserved from warmer days. They bind the hall together. They remind each listener of who they are and where they came from. Flatbread is baked on stones placed near the fire. The crust is coarse, but when warm, it fills the belly and quiets the cold. No two batches taste the same. and each has a name passed quietly among those who know. Drinking is ritual here, not frantic or wild, but part of the social current. Then comes the sharper sounds, a ladle striking iron as stew is served, a child's bark of laughter before being hushed. These sounds are part of the house, just as the beams and stones are. And then there's the horn. Not a battle horn, but the curved drinking vessel passed hand to hand. The mead inside is honeyed and slightly sour, fermented in barrels stored behind a woven curtain near the far wall. Meals come and go. A boy brings in more wood. Girl combs wool with careful fingers. No one hurries. The rhythm is slow, cyclical, intimate. You begin to feel that this longhouse is a kind of organism, breathing, digesting, remembering. Evenings bring a change in mood. Shadows stretch along the curved ceiling beams. The fire is fed, and once again the scald rises. Perhaps a different one this time, younger. These tales are not entertainment alone. They are memory, disguised as story. And as the embers sink low in the hearth, and the horn passes slower now, the longhouse exhales. Here in the circle of light and tale and shared bread, the night has its own kind of peace. To live in a Jarl's longhouse is to understand hierarchy not from speeches or scrolls, but from how space and silence are used. There are no locked doors here. Privacy is a luxury of the mind, not of architecture. Yet every person in the longhouse knows where they belong, both literally and socially. The Jarl sits at the high seat, typically on a raised platform near the center hearth. Behind him sometimes hangs a shield his own, or that of an honored ancestor. Beside him may sit his wife, a woman with her own authority, especially over the household. A story retold where a name is emphasized or conveniently left out. The Norse world prized honor, but honor could be reshaped, polished, hidden, or passed along like a worn piece of silver. Then come the favored warriors, often brothers in arms or sworn men bound by years of shared raids and loyalties. To wait. A new axe, its blade etched with runes. These are not merely rewards, they are signs of bond. Accepting a gift means accepting obligation. The more you receive, the more is expected of you. To watch who speaks and who is spoken over. The smart ones grow quiet, then powerful. They manage food, brewing, cloth-making, guest reception. But their influence runs deeper. Many are the keepers of oral memory. They know which family betrayed whom, who lost whose dowry, which lineages carry favor. And in a culture that values reputation, memory is power. If two men argue and the Jarl remains silent, that silence becomes a judgment. They advise, observe, and remind others of what has been. A Jarl who listens to the old ones is thought-wise. A Jarl who dismisses them risks losing the thread of tradition and with it, his claim to leadership. If he raises an eyebrow, it becomes a warning. If he laughs, others will too. A story told in which his name is conspicuously missing. No one confronts him directly. They don't need to. The hall itself whispers the verdict. Further down are the free farmers, craftspeople, and visitors of high reputation. Near the walls, close to the cold drafts, the thrall's enslaved workers sleep and eat. No one needs to enforce this order. It has been taught without words. It accumulates like soot on the beams layer by layer, day by day, from decisions made when no one seemed to be looking. And everyone is keeping score, even if no one ever says so aloud. To have honor here means being reliable, knowing the right moments to speak, letting others finish, keeping your word, showing restraint. It is a living record of lives weighed, measured, and remembered. Even in silence, everyone knows their place. Only the stories pass from fire to fire. In that way, even after someone is gone, their standing remains. But within these ranks, subtle negotiations unfold. A raised cup, word of praise. Children learn early to listen. Gifts circulate through the hall, especially after a successful raid or harvest. Ring of silver, cloak dyed in expensive hues. Of meals shared, of mead poured, of silences endured together. This is how loyalty is built, not through shouting, but through accumulation. The Jarl himself rarely needs to shout. His strength lies in being observed, in how he chooses what to notice and what to ignore. Power moves gently here. It is a current under the surface. Women, too, hold space in this world, especially in the hall. Elders are not discarded. They remain in the hall, even if their hands can no longer wield tools. In the longhouse, no moment is just routine. Every interaction is woven into the fabric of standing and survival. Even the act of pouring mead can carry consequence. Dishonor, too, has its place in the hall. But it rarely arrives loudly. More often, it creeps in through gestures. A man whose cup is not refilled. A seat left empty beside him at the meal. In this world, shame is a quiet exile, far more feared than a sword. Honor, on the other hand, is not loud or boastful. Disputes are sometimes settled not with violence, but with memory. He helped when the bridge fell. She gave her own cloak in the storm. He stood watch when others slept. These phrases are worth more than gold, because in the longhouse, reputation is currency. There is no parchment to record it, no herald to proclaim it. A kind of immortality, not of the body, but of place. And so the longhouse is not just shelter, nor only a political center. It holds silence like a vessel. And in that silence, power hums never raised, always known. The feasting days are different. When a festival nears, whether for Yule, for the end of a successful raid, or to honor a marriage, the longhouse changes. The hearth is fed with larger logs, more smoke rises. The scent of roasted meat, sharp herbs, and sweet bread fills every corner. There is anticipation in the air, like a low hum. Women spend days preparing. They stir thick porridge, spice it with honey and berries if the stores allow. They soak dried fish in brine to soften it, then cook it over embers until it flakes with a touch. Lamb may be roasted whole, seasoned with wild garlic and leeks, gathered months before. Flatbread is piled in baskets. Ale and meat are poured into carved wooden vessels and lined up along the benches. But the food is not the centerpiece. The stories are. He speaks of creatures from the forests, of spirits that ride the winds, of trolls beneath bridges and sea serpents that coil beneath still waters. The children gather closer, wide-eyed, not sure whether to laugh or lean back. As dusk falls, torches are lit and placed into iron sconces along the walls. An elder begins a tale, forgets halfway through, and is helped by a cousin. No one minds. The point is not the polish, it is the participation, but each telling is different, each one braided slightly new, like a rope spun of mist and firelight. Markers of time, resilience, and shared memory. They reaffirm identity, remind each person of where they belong, of what has been endured, and what lies ahead, and the scent left in the cloaks. And the songs hummed as sleep comes. In the ashes that will still be warm come morning, shadows dance between the carved beams. The fire glows wide and low in the hearth, its light catching on blades, brooches, and the glint of eyes sharpened by memory. The skald stands again. Some are prayers for good weather, some are for protection. Others no one remembers the meaning anymore, but they sing them anyway. The sounds reverberate in the timbers, blend with the wind, and seem to seep into the bones of the house. But tonight is not for saga alone, it is for folklore, the tales that live between truth and dream. Older listeners nod slowly. They've heard these stories before dozens of times. And then come the chants. The hall joins in low. Rhythmic verses passed down across generations. These feasts are not frequent. Food is too scarce for that. But when they come, they renew something beyond the belly. After the skald finishes, others rise. A woman recites a riddle no one solves. A boy tries a boast and is gently laughed at. These moments are soft anchors in a hard life. Even when the food is gone and the fire dies low, the echoes of the feast remain. The longhouse breathes differently after a feast. Slower, heavier, content. Feasts are few. Most days are filled not with celebration, but with work quiet, constant, and shared. Inside the longhouse, every surface tells a story of labor. The tables bear knife grooves from years of cutting. The walls show stains where smoke and soot have gathered in uneven waves. Even the floor, hard-packed earth overlaid with straw, is kept by steady hands, swept, freshened, turned over with care. The day begins early. Before the sun breaks over the horizon, figures stir in the dim warmth of the dying hearth. A spark is coaxed back to flame. Water is fetched from a well or nearby stream cold, sometimes icy, heavy in wooden buckets carried with aching fingers. It depends on the household, the temperament of the jarl, and the customs of the region, but always they work. Thralls rise first. They prepare the morning stew, gather wood, tend to the animals. Some are treated with basic kindness, others are not. They sew. They mend nets. They prepare next season's tools. They plan. Fetching kindling, gathering herbs, chasing chickens back into pens. Iron is precious, often imported, sometimes salvaged from broken weapons. A quiet hum of cooperation, of hands passing tools, footsteps pacing well-worn patterns across the earthen floor. Blacksmiths work at forges just outside the longhouse, where sparks fly in rhythmic bursts and the air smells of metal and sweat. A bowl of stew, hunk of bread. But still, there are moments when a girl hums while spinning, or an old man whittles a toy for a child. These are their pleasures, small, human, precious. A sip of weak ale, repeated gestures, spinning, weaving, scraping hides, form a kind of rhythm that blurs the hours. You lose yourself in it. Thought falls away, only motion remains. It's not a feast but fuel. They learn by watching, by copying, by being corrected without words. The rhythm of the loom is steady and meditative, punctuated by the soft clack of heddles and the whisper of wool.
Oh yeah?
Every garment worn by the household begins here in repetition, in patience. To thralls, side by side at the chopping block, come to understand one another without exchanging a word. A disagreement over borrowed tools may end with two men sharpening blades together in companionable silence. Occasionally someone hums a fragment of an old melody with no name, passed down from some distant grandmother who once sang the same tune over the same kind of loom. A work does not solve everything, but it gives space for tempers to cool. Not because it's needed, but because it's part of the rhythm. The spoon has been in the family for decades. He remembers who carved it, who used it first. It's worn now, darkened by time and soup, but it still serves. The longhouse teaches cooperation, not through commands, but through necessity. Women card wool, spin thread on drop spindles, weave cloth on upright looms set into the back of the hall. Children carry small chores. Men fletch arrows, carve handles for tools, or repair ships if the hall is coastal. The longhouse is not idle even in winter. When the fields sleep, the people do not. Fish are dried and salted. Meat is hung in smokehouses. Root vegetables are stored in cellars, layered in straw. Ale is brewed in great tubs, watched over like children. People wash their hands in cold water and shake out straw from their cloaks. Muscles ache, eyes blink slow. Food must be preserved. Everything is made with a kind of modest pride, not fine but lasting, not perfect but needed. And all of this happens not in silence, but in murmurs. At midday a pause. And then the work resumes. There are no weekends. No breaks for leisure. The longhouse is not a place of rest. It is a place of effort shared. And in that sharing, there is dignity. At times the labor becomes almost meditative. And within that motion, people bond. A girl learns to twist cord by sitting beside her aunt. A boy hammers nails under his uncle's watchful eye. Even disputes are softened by shared tasks. The sound of the longhouse during the day is not noisy, but alive. Scraping, stitching, quiet conversation. In a corner, an elder oils a wooden spoon. By nightfall, the tools are put away. The last scraps are fed to the fire. The day was not heroic, but it was full. And in that fullness, there is quiet pride, spoken, shared. As day gives way to twilight, the longhouse changes its rhythm once more. The work is done. The scraps have been fed to the fire. The straw has been shaken. Cloaks are hung near the walls. There is no bell to mark the end of the day, only the dimming of light and the slow settling of motion. The hearth is fed again, its glow pushing back the early dark. The flames are softer now, less about heat, more about comfort. Dogs, if there are any, lie with their heads on their paws, their ears flicking now and then at unseen sounds. All is still. The night is not feared, but it is respected. In old stories, this is when the unseen world stirs spirits, ancestors, things without names. And though most scoff at such tales during daylight, few speak of them when the wind moans against the door. It is not silence, but a different kind of song, one made of breath, warmth, and the quiet surrender of night. but eventually eyes close. The fire fades. The hall sinks into a darkness so complete it feels almost soft. The faint trace of cooked onions, of leather, of skin and warmth, it's a human smell, intimate, close, layered with memory. They speak of plans, of what was seen near the river, of a dream someone had the night before, or of nothing at all, just murmured fragments of old songs or riddles passed from mouth to mouth. Snow, if it falls, might hiss as it drifts against the roof. Somewhere distant, an owl calls. Shadows lengthen across the wooden beams. Familiar shapes fade into one another. A gentle stillness gathers in the air. A woman might whisper a blessing toward a child, asleep and unaware. These sounds do not disturb. They settle into the rhythm of the night, like another timbre in the frame. Elders wrap themselves tightly in woolen cloaks. A final bowl of broth may be passed, or a last sip of mead, but there is no feast, no story. Just the hush of shared breath and the creak of old timber settling into silence. The last ember dies down to ash. People speak less. Not out of fatigue, but out of instinct. They fade not with fear, but with familiarity. These are not haunts, but echoes. The longhouse does not forget. Its wood has absorbed every moment, every breath, every silence. Children curl close to their mothers or older siblings. Dreams here carry pieces of the day. The face of someone lost, the glint of sun on a blade, the voice of a parent long gone. And when the fire crackles, it's easy to imagine that someone else still tends it, someone from long ago. People mark time in the way the light moves across the beams, in the shape of the smoke as it curls toward the thatch, in the creak of footsteps above the buried stories in the floor. The animals outside quiet down too. Chickens rustle, then sleep. The scent of the longhouse at night is different. Less smoke, more wool, the earthy smell of straw. No one lies alone. Even the thralls have their corner, pressed close to one another for warmth. There is no privacy, but there is presence. A nearness that transcends words. You hear others breathe, feel them shift in the dark. You know you're not alone. Sleep comes slowly, not always easily. Thoughts drift of tomorrow's work, of dreams half remembered, of loved ones gone. And still, even in this rest, the longhouse lives. The embers glow faintly. A log shifts. Someone murmurs in sleep. A baby stirs, then settles. The longhouse holds it all. Labor, laughter, birth, death, and now sleep. And as it has for generations, it keeps its watch beneath the stars, warm, and utterly patient. Sometimes one or two voices remain awake longer. They speak in low tones, barely more than breath. A grandfather might hum a verse known only to him. Outside, the cold presses in. The longhouse does not shiver, but it feels the weight. The wind might rattle the wooden shutters. Time slows here. There are no clocks, only the fading of the fire, the shifting of bodies, the ache in a shoulder, the dream that visits again and again. In this night, in this place, you are not alone. The ghosts of the day linger, quiet conversations, remembered gestures, the scratch of a spoon in a bowl. Even sleep is not entirely escape. Eventually, the last voice falls quiet. Still the longhouse endures. Until morning comes again with its smoke, its footsteps, its labor, and all of this begins anew. Unchanged and yet slightly different, because another night has passed beneath its beams, and you, like so many before, were held safely in its breath. And so, the fire fades, and our journey comes to a close. You've walked the frozen paths of a Viking thrall. You've stood in the shadow of warriors and kings. You've listened to the whisper of ancient stones, and you've shared the quiet breath of a longhouse settling in for the night. History is often told with swords and sails, with noise and clamor, but here it rests in softer places. In the slow rhythm of daily toil, in the hush of snowfall on a timber-bird roof, in the spaces between stories where lives were lived, not in legend, but in the ordinary. The people you met tonight will not shout to be remembered. They leave no grand monuments, but in their silence they endure, in smoke, in straw, in stories. If your eyes are still open, feel free to let them close. Let the weight of woolen cloaks and the scent of bread drift around you like dreams. Let the longhouse fade into quiet. Let the flicker of fire become darkness. And if you return to this place again tomorrow, or weeks from now, we'll still be here, waiting, unchanged and gentle. Until then, rest well, traveler. You are safe. You're warm. You are home.